I guess just tell me a little bit about Smokey Okies.
We've been here since the beginning.
Okay.
So we were founded in 2018, small, privately held family company. We just we're passionate about cannabis. I'm an attorney, and when we found out that it was going to be on the ballot, me and my cousin got together and we were like, hey man, I think we could pull this off. Could we start a grow? And it kind of went from some ideas in the summer of 2018 to legitimate research, touring around, all within a very short period of time, putting a rough plan together that we didn't really know what we were doing, but we put it together and we launched and found space, leased space, started gathering the equipment, all of that, and we started operating in 2019.
Okay. And why did you see this as an attractive opportunity?
Well, I definitely saw the revenues and things that it did in other states. Part of it was the traction to the business opportunity. The other part was attraction to running a business with the subject matter I'm really into, the product I'm really into.
Sure.
So it's a combination of passion project and entrepreneurial opportunity. You got to have both. You don't want to just chase your passion, not make any money. And then you also want to have drive if you're going after a good business opportunity.
Okay. I mean, as you mentioned, Oklahoma is a very laissez-faire model, limits on licenses, only $2,500 to get a license. I guess at the outset, what did you think about that licensing structure?
So I was a really big fan of it and a big proponent of it, and I somewhat still am a proponent of, I prefer a laissez-faire model versus a model where some authority figure, board, whoever gets to pick and choose who can participate in it. There's really no real way of doing that legitimately. And that's why every state that's done that goes through 2 years of litigation before they even get their program off the ground. So I was really attracted to how 788 was written, to where the state, anybody could apply, and the state had to start issuing licenses. And the reason why the authors of that bill wrote it that way was the authors of 788, they went and looked at all the other programs and they picked out what worked and what didn't. And their whole objective was to have a medical program that would get off the ground without multiple years of litigation, accusations of corruption, accusations of cronyism, and it was a very well-intentioned sort of thing. I was a huge proponent of it because I knew that if they did it any other way, I wouldn't get in, because nobody does.
Well, you have like these multi-state operators that have gone through this process in lots of other states and know how to, I guess, work the system.
So I'm from Missouri. My parents live in Missouri. I was born here, and I've lived in both states. I've been here the last almost 20 years. But my father in Missouri applied to have a grow, applied to have a cannabis license, and completely lost out. Him and hundreds of other people, and they only issued a very small amount of licenses, and he was part of a protracted litigation involving lots of other parties that didn't get it, and they exhausted administrative remedies, district court remedies, all of that, and it went nowhere. And that happened after I started Smokey Okies, but I saw those things in other states, so I was a huge proponent of the way they did things. I was like, if they did it any other way, none of us would be here in the business. It would be a multi-state operator that somehow hired the right firm to do the application, the right lobbyist or whatever. And that's what happened in Missouri, is you had a lot of people get licenses that had nothing more than P.O. boxes.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, the flip side of that is, at one point I think there were more than 13,000 licensed cannabis businesses in Oklahoma, more than any other state, including California.
Yeah.
9,000 grows at one point. That's gone down some. 2,800 dispensaries. So the challenge is, can anybody make any money? I guess what kind of challenges has that presented to Smokey Okies becoming a successful business?
So the biggest problem with Oklahoma was they issued licenses and they created a bunch of rules, but they didn't create any system to inspect, enforce, patrol those rules or those licenses.
Right.
And part of that was the way it was, because it legally had to be implemented within 60 days. They were literally caught off guard and had to start issuing licenses before they had even created the infrastructure to inspect, administer those licenses, inspect, patrol, and do checkups. Now, that was sort of their own fault. Prior to 788 being voted on in June of 2018, that prior legislative session, February to May, Bud Scott and the authors of 788 went to the legislature and said, hey, because it was not on their radar. They said, hey, this thing, we've got the poll numbers, it's going to pass overwhelmingly, and you're going to have to start administering licenses and running a program, something you've never done before, subject matter you've never done before. Let's get ahead of this. It's a legislative referendum. It's not a constitutional. It can be amended, adjusted. It can be altered by legislation. Right. So they went to the Capitol and said, hey, can you pass some regs that will help you implement this a little bit more smoothly? And they blew them off. They either didn't think cannabis was going to pass, or they were too busy dealing with issues they had that session. There was a huge teacher strike. There was a bunch of other things that were taking up time and bandwidth at the Capitol. And those things sucked the bandwidth out of them paying any attention to cannabis, and cannabis passed, and then they were legally obligated to start issuing licenses. Now, I'll say once they did start issuing licenses, they did a terrible job. I mean, they had applications come across their desk that were prima facie void or obviously fraudulent. I mean, they issued hundreds upon hundreds of licenses where the same person's name is on every single application. Right. And you know, they didn't ever leave their office and send anyone out to any of these places until basically like into 2021, 2022. So they never got boots on the ground, inspected a single. Meanwhile, they handed out licenses, collected all the fees. I feel like even them being caught off guard in year one, 2018, I mean, they could have gotten it together a lot quicker. I mean,
there's a guy who was indicted out of Tulsa, an attorney, and I think it was alleged that his name was on 300 some licenses, I think. Like, that's the kind of thing you're talking about.
Those are the kinds of things I'm talking about.
Or like a flashing red light, even if you're just doing sort of a perfunctory review of the paperwork.
That's absolutely correct. And it was a red flag for the Bureau of Narcotics. They caught on to that stuff and started investigating immediately. OMA, I mean, our biggest criticism of us within the industry of OMA is that they just have not done anything on farm enforcement, and they've kind of said it's red tape, it's bureaucracy. Now that we've been liberated from the Department of Health, we now are a freestanding agency. We can do a little bit more, and you're starting to see that. I mean, they're definitely telling us that, but that's been our biggest complaint. So I think that, in regard to your initial question about was it a good idea to issue thousands of licenses, I mean, you know, the government can issue licenses, but then don't make rules that all of us are following, and don't wait 4 years to even see if any of them are being followed.
I mean, the current head of OMA, Adria Berry, came in August of 2021, and she's consistently said that enforcement is a priority, and they hired, I think, quite a few additional staff to focus on that. Are you seeing the effects of that at this point, or is it still kind of a wait and see in terms of whether there's credibility behind that rhetoric in terms of enforcement?
We got inspected 3 times last summer, but we're right here in the middle of the city. So it's time for them to hit some gravel roads and go out to where the real crime is, right? And the other people you've interviewed, like The Peak, they get inspected regularly. One of our good customers, Fireleaf, they get inspected regularly, like every 6 months. And OMA has claimed they've inspected all of the processors, and they're moving through the grows and the dispensaries, but Yeah, I think we would all like to see some more inspection, and particularly inspection of the ones of us that aren't out in the open, like the big brand names that you see. I mean, go hit these unmarked buildings and these clandestine greenhouses that are really causing a divide in our state. Right now, we're going through an urban versus rural divide.
Okay.
Because the rural folks deal with issues that we don't hear or see about, and it's a real problem for them. And we in the industry need to be empathetic to their concerns. Mm-hmm. But in the urban areas, we have a lot of the more successful cannabis businesses, and we want better regulation of the marketplace, but we want expansion of the customer base. We want adult use, and we have a lot of alliances. I mean, there's a lot of other organizations that benefit from cannabis, everything from commercial real estate brokerages to all of the trades, your carpentry, heating, plumbing, air, all of your construction. All of these ancillary businesses benefit from cannabis. And so cannabis has a pretty positive story. I mean, if you go to like, if I go to one of my kids' birthday parties and I'm hanging out with their parents, I'm going to meet multiple other people that are somehow either have an ownership interest in cannabis business or own a business that services a cannabis business.
Right.
In the rural areas, though, you hear gunshots, you see lots of things that you don't see, and they deal with a different set of problems that we don't really see, and so it has created this urban versus rural divide in Oklahoma.